We are now in the Serena's Playbook segment. And what are we going to talk about in this segment? Well, you see, something occurred recently on the Joe Budden podcast. And the Joe Budden podcast is primarily an entertainment podcast produced, founded by Joe Budden, who in the hip hop and music world, if you know, you know, is a sort of legend in the space for their past, for Joe's past work, and also for Joe Budden's work within the media space now, and now having an entirely independent network where he has more than just a podcast, but he also has spin-off content streams, and you can check out more on the Joe Budden network. So Joe Budden has a panel of experts, some of whom are friends. Everyone has a diverse background. Nearly everyone has sort of an interest in the American hip hop and music scene, in the entertainment space, in the business space, and more recently, there are new panelists like Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, who is very much in the political arena and has his own show called Night School, and also is a contributor for Al Jazeera. And not in this episode, this is a sort of response that I want us to sort of look at as part of my sort of Serena's Playbook segment, where we look at how content creators are having to navigate a climate of viewers, listeners, followers who are all tuned in to what's going on socio-politically and would like you, as their favorite creator or regular sort of creator broadcaster, to have an opinion on an issue that matters a lot to them. And so what occurred on a previous broadcast of the Joe Budden podcast was a segment that was sort of unplanned, where Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, and it was a viral clip, it went quite viral, basically was discussing Gaza, Palestine, and mentioned more recently how he has lost colleagues, other journalists who've been killed in Gaza. And the kind of pivot from something super traumatizing was found and said to be a lot insensitive and lazy on the part of Joe Budden mainly. And so the sort of, not, I don't want to call it backlash, let's just call it a vocal criticism from a lot of listeners, was how can you not have a response to something so deeply, so profoundly tragic, when your panelist, who is an expert within that sort of arena, is sharing that they've lost colleagues, fellow journalists in this so-called war in Gaza? How is it that Joe Budden doesn't have something empathic, sorry to say, or supportive? And why is it that the pivot was a little bit lazy and to something music related? And there's lots of reasons that are very reasonable for this. Reasons? Reasonable? There's a reasonable explanation. And that is, it's a primarily entertainment podcast. There are, of course, heavy issues that they come across from time to time. And discussing heaviness on a largely entertainment podcast is going to be tricky, especially if you're not an expert within that area. And Joe Budden says something very, I think, helpful in his response to the so-called backlash. And that is, he says, this is not my ministry. So we'll come to that bit in a second. So that's why I wanted to cover this. I think it's a really good, useful masterclass for us who are in the content creator world, but also those of us who are subscribers, users of this kind of media, who tune in, for us to sort of adjust our expectations. It's also why within my system, via Serena's playbook for creators and those building their business, etc. online, I have a zone called Media and Zeitgeist Awareness, which can really help you to look at that sort of strategic zone of interest when you are out there building your brand and operating as a brand. It's really important to understand your audience's interest when it comes to socio-political matters, to have an awareness of media, how it's developing, how people, users, followers, listeners, etc., viewers are now engaging with content, what they want from their creators, etc., etc. So having a kind of a finger on the pulse for all of that is really super important. So that's why I thought it would be brilliant to bring this into the Serena's Playbook segment. Let's press play. I'm giving you a warning, as I gave you a warning at the top of this show. The N word will be used. There is some cussing and swearing. My ears don't bleed from it. I'm not offended by it. You might be. Just be aware. But I'm completely cool with it. As you know, I have a music journalism background. I used to cover hip hop quite a bit on the Life at Cadbury podcast, so it's all good for me. And the Joe Budden podcast is part of my snack box of content. So let's go. And that's him saying, sort of segueing to this, in order to explain this with humor.
I gotta go to the bathroom. Yeah, nah, let me sit up for these niggas. Yeah, I want to know, Joe, I mean, for a minute. Yeah.
So he does this thing where he says, now I'm going to have to speak to people who I don't normally speak to, because that's not his usual audience. And that's fine. He's open. He's happy to talk about it. He takes a pause twice. Excellent.
Yes. Anywhere. So
before he does the all lives thing, because Mark addresses that, because before we do the all lives thing, which is all lives matter, think about every life and their interaction with power. I've said this on my TikToks before, and that is, not every life has the same relationship to power and has the same experience in terms of benefiting from power, their proximity to power. So that's why it can sometimes be a little bit lazy. But him saying that this is not my ministry, it's a really good choice of words. Why? Because, you know, when you think of ministry, you're thinking of being at the pulpit. You're thinking about being on a platform where people really listen to you. And his pulpit is entertainment, it's hip hop, it's very much American sort of black entertainment culture. And it's really important that we call it as they would refer to it. Okay, so that's not me trying to be political using certain labels and categories. I'm describing it as those who produce this kind of content and those who consume this kind of content would consider it to be. And whilst the production and those who run the podcast aren't all Black Americans, there is still, I mean, if you look at the demographic of this podcast, it's very much a hip hop audience, and the kind of audience who have really come up through, I would say, a real struggle, and those who also were fans of Joe Budden for a very long time and supporters of him and his music, and now a fan of the podcast and the panelists. So again, that should give you a little bit more context to understand that this is not his ministry, this is not his usual space, and he'll put his hands up and actually say, and because it's not my usual space and because it's not my ministry, I don't have the expertise or the preparation to immediately speak on it. When you are within a certain space and someone says something that's unexpected, if you're within that sort of if you're used to using a certain kind of vocabulary, if you exist within a space where you're always familiar with a certain kind of material, then you can easily summon up a response. And sometimes our response to something uncomfortable can come across as a little bit, ooh, you really don't care. But that's sometimes also a trauma response. So it's really important to consider all of these things before you start, doing a bit of a witch hunt. But he still put his hands up. He still said it wasn't the right response.
But how that came off, yeah, it looked really irresponsible.
To Mark, Lamont Hill, said something really interesting in response. And he said, well, your algorithm is different. I think there's something that I think will definitely come up in my research for my master's that I'm currently doing in systems thinking. And my research is all based on AI and how it's informing our identity and how we build community and how we engage with community and form those communities. And the point about algorithm is really important because we can become so, I guess, desensitized or even just unaware because the algorithm is curating things in such a way where it may show you a discussion or a topic or a theme. Sorry, it may show you a theme or a topic, but it won't show you the next layers of the discussion, of the discourse, so that you can create much more depth in terms of your intelligence and your awareness of an issue. And that's why the algorithm has a big part to play in all of our lives when it comes to our understanding of these really important events going on in the world. And I think you should, when Flip is saying that world, it's like this world that is so separate from us, and it's actually very much interlinked, but the media and all these entities will do their job to separate all of that. So this is not your issue. The lack of human rights being experienced, the sort of the, the injustice that is being experienced in that part of the world is not your interest. You and just do your job. And you see, the establishment and the media has been doing that to us for decades, for a very long time. And so that's why I don't think it then makes us lazy. It trains our brain. It's a brain conditioning that takes place. And now the algorithm is only amplifying that. It's amplifying that. So that's where we have to give grace not only to our viewers, our listeners, give grace to our viewers and listeners and to the creators of content, but then we also have to challenge that within us, because we have to become aware that we as viewers and consumers of content, as well as us as creators of content, are being impacted by this thing, and it's actually putting us all in these sort of rabbit holes, or just actually placing us firmly under rocks.
All can have the conversation.
I like what he's just saying there, and Joe Budden kind of brings it back to the statement that he wants to make. I just want to say on that point of depth and having more depth to share, and being much sort of being more prepared and sort of well versed in these areas, you can see is being, I guess, fulfilled by new content creators who are within an academic or scholarly space. If you notice, like, the kind of content that you consume perhaps is on TikTok or elsewhere, and they're academics. There are people who are experts in certain fields who are giving you a little bit more, giving you the thing that you've been craving, that you've been lacking. There's a deficiency for that sort of depth. And we're all sort of I don't want to say guilty of it, but in the trap of not reading enough. Like, I've got my pile of books that I try and keep near me as much as possible, because although I'm studying, and a big part of that sort of research is reading, and a big part of my job is reading and writing, etc. However, sort of really developing your sort of understanding on things requires us to come off screen and get into a book, but we're not doing that. And so if you're a content creator, it's really, I think, helpful for us to encourage our viewers and those who tune into us to make that space and make that time to read something which is longer than 3 pages, and that is written in a language that we're not used to, something a little bit more academic, something a little bit meatier, a long form think piece, even if you disagree with it, is so important, so that we don't end up having this brain rot, which I discuss a lot, actually, and I'll discuss it a little bit later in a second. And I'm just going to end it there with this, is that everyone's domain links with what's going on in the world. And that's precisely why within my 7 strategic zones of interest, for those who are building a brand online, who have content creation, within those 7 zones, I have media awareness, zeitgeist awareness, understand how your domain links with these kinds of events and issues that your following, your viewers, your listeners care about. Otherwise, it's lazy. It's a reason why so many influencers on Instagram or elsewhere will then be criticized for not speaking up, yet they may be of a similar faith or etc. etc. And that's a whole other rabbit hole. Because I think it's safe to say that the days of being a compartmentalized influencer creator has gone, and staying away from politics has gone. And so you either say absolutely nothing, you're deathly silent, and that speaks volumes. Remember, no data is data. Or you speak up and you face it. Which is why, you've seen from early on, from, not just, since October the 7th in 2023, have you seen those in the public eye and celebrities, etc., speak up, but there have been many who have been speaking on issues, on Palestinian issues, etc., or indeed Israeli issues for a very long time. And so it's no surprise that they are now speaking louder, considering what's going on, which is a genocide, which is ethnic cleansing. So I think, again, like I said, it's really important. And for me, even as a creator, to say this, and I think a lot of people get this sort of almost lazy interpretation or understanding of creators who align with a certain issue. Like, this ain't an issue. Objectively speaking, what's going on is not right, and they want to connect the sort of the rationale and the reasoning for why you're speaking on this, Serena, is because you are from a Muslim faith. And that is sort of lazy. It's because, as human beings with mental critical thinking faculties, we should be able to use our voices against injustice, regardless of whether we have a link with so that's the kind of lazy connecting with things which we just don't want to sort of encourage. And what that does then is it gives people who aren't then of that particular faith, if you're going to go follow that logic, people who aren't of that faith, just not say anything or not support it because, oh well, it's not my faith, which is ridiculous. So that's your segment for Serena's Playbook segment, where I discuss things in the content creation world, how we can use the lessons from other creators to help us build our sort of own brands. But yeah, I mean, on Twitch right now, thank you so much for jumping in the comments. Like I said, no data is also data, and so by not saying anything entirely, it's going to sort of land you in a bit of hot water regardless. It's important you just do the work, do a little bit of research, do the research, do the sort of homework, and get your words in order so you don't say a bad word, right? But just do the thing that Joe Budden did, which is with a lot of humility say, I was wrong and this ain't my ministry, but I want to do better. I think that's an excellent statement that I think even me as a PR couldn't possibly come up with for him, because that's got to come from him in a sincere and authentic way. And I thought it did. Right, we are coming to the last sort of quarter of this show,